In this module, we'll talk about goals and objectives. And I think first we want to start by defining exactly what a goal and an objective is. First off, a goal is the overarching global statement of what the learner outcome is. The objectives are the smaller bit-sized pieces that you will use to reach that goal. So the goal is what we're trying to get to, and the objectives are the statements that are going to get us there. In instructional design or the development of a class, everything is tied around your goals and your objectives. The objectives are identified early on in the development process so that whoever's writing the material, if you're writing a book, if you're designing a classroom or a particular lesson that you're going to teach, that is done at the very beginning by outlining your goals and what those objectives are that you're wanting to meet. So everything in a course is tied to goals and objectives. You can look in any EMT or paramedic book and you can see the goals and the objectives. It used to be the National Standard Curriculum. Now we've got the National Educational Standards, all of which have objectives and goals that are outlined for us. So before you go teach any class, first thing you want to do is you want to see what the objectives are for that class, what it is that you're supposed to cover. That gives you the depth and breadth of the knowledge that you need to share with the students. So you'll know kind of where you need to go. Some of the discussions that we've had in the past in classes are where people use test banks. And why do test banks work when you teach a class, but somebody else has written a group of test questions and you're going to use that test bank to educate your students or to assess their knowledge? Well, it's because of goals and objectives. That's the whole purpose. If those test questions are written based on numbered or identified goals or objectives, and then if you teach to that objective, it doesn't matter who wrote the test question, where that test question came from, because it is based on that particular objective. So you can question, or you can draw those questions out of a question bank based on those objectives and simply say, I need 3 questions from objective 7.1, I need 3 questions from objective 7.2, and then you can put that in a test so that the students then are assessing, or you are then assessing your students' knowledge of those particular objectives. So if you write your own class, make up whatever class you want, the first thing you need to do is identify what your objectives are, what that goal is, what it is you want to teach the learner, and then how do you want to get to that particular area. So the first thing you would do is create in outline format, create a list of the different objectives that you're going to meet. Then you write to those objectives your information you would teach to those objectives. And at the end of the course, you assess those objectives by multiple different ways. It really depends on, and as we get into the objectives, it really depends on how you're going to write the objective and what that objective says. What are the key verbs, those action verbs that are in there? Are you going to define? Are you going to describe? Do you want somebody to differentiate? Do you want them to identify? Those different terms are kind of leading as to what's the best way to assess that particular objective. So in an airway class, for example, one of the objectives would be for an EMT to be able to identify a nasopharyngeal airway, an oropharyngeal airway, and a bag valve mask. So at the end of the course, when you create your assessment of those objectives, you want to be able to show that that EMT was able to identify the oropharyngeal airway, the nasopharyngeal airway, and a bag valve mask. So you can create a couple of different questions. You could use pictures and have them be able to select the bag valve mask out of a picture of 4 or 5 different pictures. You can have them identify them in multiple different ways. So that's basically how objectives and how a course is built. It's all built around those objectives. So you start with the objectives. You teach those objectives. you review the objectives at the end, and then you assess the student's ability or their mastery of those objectives. And the assessments are largely built around how those objectives are written, so that when somebody comes in from whatever accrediting agency, that's a big buzzword right now with accreditation. So somebody comes in from an accrediting agency, they look at your course outline, they look at your objectives, then they want to know how did you deliver those objectives. They also want to know how you assessed the student to tell that they were able to meet those objectives. How did you do that? And when you map it all nice and neat together, you can show that the student was taught the objective in this portion of the class. The student then was assessed by whatever method it is that you choose to assess it, and move forward from there. So that's basically what goals and objectives are.